process. So who knows? All right, whatever.
Okay.
All right, this is on YouTube, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There it is. I can never find it.
All right, there we are.
Yeah, so that's good. Got the window cracked today. It's nice and warm in here, so
I know.
we'll get some. We'll get some air ventilation flowing through the old apartment here, which will be cool. So anyway, yeah. Well, it's gonna be a good day today, Mayor. I'm gonna have to get out, hit the town today. It's gonna be a good one. I think tomorrow, the whole weekend is gonna be good.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
What a difference! What a difference! Yeah, Spotsylvania was cool. It was definitely cool. So, but yeah, what a difference the weather makes. It's unbelievable. But anyway, yeah, Spotsylvania is cool. I definitely want to get back there again. So
I do too, especially after studying it. Morning, Barbara.
No. Yeah. No, I mean, studying it's a cool thing too, but it's one of those places you get to walk around and see it. I mean, nothing against obviously the Gettysburgs of the world, those ones, but I mean, they're not. There are some places you can go and visit that it still looks kind of the same, and Gettysburg is basically an outdoor statuary park, is what it really is.
It's very, and the thing that opened my eyes to that was like, going to places like Antietam and Chickamauga, where you don't have the statuary there. You have the monuments and stuff. Good morning, Lisa. Did I see that Lisa's book is available for pre-order on Amazon?
Yep, I saw it, Lisa, online this morning that you posted it. So we will look forward to reading that. That'll be awesome as usual. And we'll look forward to seeing that. But Lisa had herself an adventure last weekend, Mary. Since she's on, she was down in Alexandria.
She was, yes.
And I was going to ask her if she saw the Masonic Monument, but that doesn't exist, so she obviously couldn't. and so that's what that was. So she had another knock out of the park message, her thing. So her and her husband Jim went down there and checked that out. We didn't get to go this time, but we did see her pictures.
Yeah, and I think she's at Tudor Hall on June 4th, which is
God, you're reading my mind. I was going to say June 4th. Lisa, we'll mention it when people come out. But Lisa will be doing Tudor Hall on June 4th. Almost I think a little more than a year to she did her presentation on Asia booth. So we'll get down to see her do that again soon. But yeah, go see Lisa if you haven't had a chance. But we'll mention that.
Oh, Andrea Quinn's on here. Andrea, you'll like to listen to our episode because we mentioned your boy Barlow a lot.
Yeah, Francis Channing Barlow, interesting fella. He's he's an interesting study in a lot. I mean, I have to tell Andrew this, but in a lot of different ways. And we talk about Spotsylvania. He's relatively new to his division. The men don't really know him. He doesn't really know the men, but all they know about him is this hard disciplinarian. That story about making the soldiers, the officers, take off the boards, shoulder boards because of made him put them on. I mean, they took them off after what happened to Sedgwick, and he made them put them on. And then he changes. His mood changes. He's kind of he turns into the soft and fuzzy Francis Barlow.
Yeah.
Guys like Nelson Miles. No, it's okay, Nelson. You're good. Have you been working out, Nelson? You just look really, really
he totally
good.
Does this 180 on how he treats people. I think because he was, but then when Barlow's men were going in to, I think it was the Mule Shoe, like Hancock was on his horse and saying, I won't ever see those guys again. Like Hancock was really worried about it.
Well, he gave away his personal belongings. He gave away all his stuff to his friend because he figured this was going to be it. He's got John Rutter Brooke from Gettysburg, the Wheatfield guy. He's got him. He's obviously got Nelson Miles. People don't know a lot about Nelson Miles, but most guys from Michigan, Pennsylvania, and New York, he is. They don't expect him to come back, but then they burst through that first line, come out of the woods, and they hit that picket line. They think that's it, and they run those poor guys from Witcher's Brigade, those Virginians back, and they think, well, this was easy. This was the big march at night. Then they look out in the distance when the fog clears and they see this Gibraltar, the Mule Shoe, and they're like, oh shit, we're in for it now. And then he says, we got to go. If we stay on this field, we're dead. We have to run. And they 19,000 guys, full speed. Must have been like the Boston Marathon at the beginning. Full speed,
I made some 11 poor jokes in this episode, but
right at the Mule Shoe, and he hits them right in the nose, and if you've been to Spotsylvania and you've walked across that field, you know, start at the Landrum House and you work, go to the Brown Farm, go to the Landrum House, and then you kind of work your way forward through that field, and you see how it dips.
Yeah.
And you come right up that slope. It's like a mini Pickett's Charge. And then you hit that mule shoe and you can see the breastworks are still there. And you go, what the hell? They I don't want to say they got lucky, but it took a lot of balls. And they got bailed out by the weather. They got bailed out by that fog. They couldn't be seen. That must have been a tough situation for Francis there, for old Swaggy Frank.
It's a terrible, it's a terrible battle. And I mean, I'd never really, when it comes to 1864, I studied more Western theater than I have Eastern, sad to say, but this has really thrown me into studying the Eastern theater more. And I'm seeing it as very fascinating. Oh, MJ said, good episode. I watched the YouTube. Thank you, MJ.
Oh yeah, appreciate it.
And so I read, there was 2 books that I got about this thing. So thankful for Interlibrary loan. But the one I read was by Chris Mikowski and I think it was Chris White. I hope I'm getting the names right there. But anyway, they wrote, I think it's called A Season of Slaughter. And it's one of the emerging Civil War books. And it's great because it's got like the driving tour, like each chapter has kind of a tour at the end of it so you can take the book with you to the battlefield, and they tell you like where the monuments are and stuff. And the other book that I got, which is specifically dedicated to the fighting at the Bloody Angle, is by Jeffrey Wirt. And it's recent. It came out in 2022. And I'm like 50 pages in, and it's really interesting too. He sets it up very well, like what's going on in the AOP. Like the thing with Spotsylvania is it's not just this horrific fighting. It's all the inner politics that are happening as well. That is quite fascinating. And what really opened my eyes was the Phil Sheridan thing and the Jeb Stuart that, was, and I think Chris Mikowski mentions this in his book, like, was Jeb Stuart's death really that big of a deal? Like, it's a big deal in the Confederacy, but Sheridan makes it to be like, oh my God, like now Jeb's gone and we can like.
Well, Jeb was a cult of personality. Don't forget when Joseph Beaver caught Maryland Stewart, and he says, you caught me, I am General Stewart, and he gets all excited. Jeb? He's like, no, George. He's like, crap. Okay, fine. I guess I'll take you anyway. But he was a cult of personality. But people talk a lot about Jeb. They talk about his march around McClellan and all that. You can make a case if you really Civil War nerd out and get in the real weeds. You can make a case what Jeb did here at Spotsylvania was his highest moment in the war because he basically from the wilderness down to Spotsylvania, down that road, you have Jeb's guys blocking Sheridan's guys, and Sheridan, he's over at Todd's Tavern. He's over nearby at the Piney Church. Sheridan is, and he's hanging out, and Meade's going to come up and see how his men dilly-dally and hanging out, sleeping by Todd's Tavern, and Meade's going to sit there and say, "Get your ass going." He's literally slapping him in the ass with swords.
He's like Meade walking around kicking the guys in the savannah, basically.
But then then Meade goes, "You need to go clear this road. You need to go get Jeb Stuart's guys out of here." And then of course Sheridan gets pissed because Meade's leading his men. It ends up in a big argument. And Sheridan tells him, paraphrasing, "Why don't I want to sacrifice my cavalry for some stupid infantry? This is a waste of." And this is the politics of what it was. And Sheridan was terrible, but he's like you go to play a lottery ticket, you lose 9 straight times, but you win that 10th times, who keeps you going. That's how Sheridan was.
Yeah,
he was
I really like that when you said that in the episode, like this is a guy that's lost more than he's won, but he makes it seem like he's won a lot. And I mean, Sheridan loved himself some Sheridan.
He's that girlfriend, boyfriend who treats you like shit, but every so often he brings you flowers and you go, "Oh, okay." And then but that's who he was with Grant. He fell on his dick enough times, but then he got up, right? You had Cedar Creek, you had Stones River, and then this, and then he's like, "I'm gonna go get Jeb." And he pulls the whole cavalry that goes to Yellow Tavern. He gets Jeb. The Canadians help with that whole situation, right?
Yeah, John Huff.
John Huff. But
he was killed. Did you know he was killed a month later?
Yeah. We talked about it, but he's all excited. Look, I got Jeb. Jeb's dead. Everyone's hooray!
Yeah.
But then the downside is there's no cavalry now, and so when you look at the march of the 9th of March 11th, May 11th into May 12th, what Barlow's men had to sustain, and how they had to attack the Muleshoe blind, it's because this is what Sheridan's doing, and because if he didn't get Jeb, this would have been one of the biggest military blunders in the Civil War. It would have been up there with all the big boys. But he got him. And because he got him, he's the hero. But again, all the Union deaths in Spotsylvania, it's tough. It's impossible to quantify. How many could have been saved if cavalry had properly screened and reconnoitered the area? Is Jeb worth it? Is he worth it? And that's the debate people have.
And that's where I used to think, yes, it was. But then again, I was drinking the, kind of the Sheridan Kool-Aid, even though I'm like David.
It's the only thing you weren't drinking yesterday, by the way.
Anyway, David and Miranda can't stand Sheridan. I can't either. I like him as he's an interesting figure to study, but he's not that good. He has good days. Stones River is probably his best day. He's got Cedar Creek.
He's got 3 good days. He's got 3. Okay. And that's all he has. You can, if we're passing out the overrated, slicing up the overrated blame pie, and we're handing out slices. Okay. We've talked about Stonewall. We've talked about that. On the Union side, is there a more overrated guy than Sheridan? Probably not, right?
I
don't know.
I don't think so. I think Sheridan is one of the most overrated guys in the Civil War. I mean, Sherman too, a little bit. I do see Sherman as being a little bit overrated, but the two of them were good advocates for themselves and their accomplishments. The next, so we're going to do part 2 of Spotsylvania next week, but after that, we're going to head back to the Western Theater and we're going to talk Pickett's Mills. And that is a battle that Sherman doesn't even really mention it in his memoirs. And it's kind of it's like Spotsylvania with the horrific fighting, but on a much smaller scale. 1864 Civil War is brutal. All the years are brutal, but 1864 has this different feel to it. It seems.
It gets worse every single year. I mean, you're Lincoln sitting back at the White House, and every year it's getting progressively worse. The weapons, the technology is getting better. You've got Gatling guns by the end. You have all of this going on. And the strategy is changing. And I mean, we talked the key thing about the key thing about this is what people never really study or that much. They don't pay attention to it. Is the significance of May 7th of 1864, when Grant had made that decision to, instead of attacking Richmond, to focus on Lee. This is right when the Wilderness ends. So you got a lot of shit went down at the Wilderness. Obviously, Longstreet's going to get shot. You're gonna have Warren, G.K. Warren is going to fall on his junk hard at the Wilderness. So you got a lot of yin and yang with this, right? But he's going to make that decision instead of falling back all the time, like every other general's done. Meade, Burnside, Hooker, pick one. He's going to go around his left and south. And he's going to keep the pressure on Lee. So, and Lee figures, okay, we win a battle. When we win a battle, lose a battle, this is what the Union does. They fall back, they lick their wounds, they rest, and then they come at us again. Always focused on Richmond. Now the focus is not on Richmond, it's on Lee. They're going to use Richmond as a diversion. That's why they want to go to Spotsylvania Courthouse. It's like Gettysburg, all the roads converge. So if you are going to attack, if you're going to attack Richmond, you got to have Spotsylvania Courthouse, because when you got 120,000 men, you need a place to kind of pull them all together, right? It's like a hub of a wheel on a smaller scale than Gettysburg. So Lee's thinking he still wants Richmond. He's got to take Spotsylvania. I better get there before he does. And there's that race. And that's where Jeb does that great job where he's falling back from ridgeline to ridgeline. He's going to get, first corps support from the infantry, but now it's going to be Richard Anderson, not going to be James Longstreet. Richard Anderson is the same guy during the second day in Gettysburg when Ambrose Wright and Cadmus Wilcox, all those guys are doing their thing in his division. He's back getting banged up, drinking at a party. So this is the people you have in charge here, right? And that, so but it's a situation where it's a race, and there's two races with this battle, which are really fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's a very fascinating battle to study. Not just, and I mean, we do talk tactics. Obviously, you have to when you're discussing the Civil War, but we talk about the stories too, and that's what there's so much written about this battle by the soldiers and just how horrific it was. And the other thing, that kind of hit me too, just kind of with some of the shit that's been going on social media and stuff, it's like, this is why we study it, is to tell these guys' story, because how horrific it was. Like, these guys were like, I never want to see anything like this again. And the same stuff is said about Pickett's Mills too. But I also like just the personalities in this. Like, you got G.K. Warren, who is, my God, he does not play well with others at all.
No,
like he's that kid at nursery school that just did not get along with anybody.
G.K. Warren, is the problem with him is that, he has that really bad day, right? And in Wilderness, and he wants to redeem himself. Yeah. And the whole fiasco with Gershom Mott, the way that whole thing plays itself.
Mott is a scapegoat. I feel really bad for him.
No, he's a scapegoat. He gets blamed. So, we joke about Sedgwick and the elephant, all that stuff, and right. But the fact of the matter is, when he gets killed, that is a huge loss for Grant and the Union. People look at Sedgwick. I don't know why. Sedgwick is one of that A-list level generals, but maybe because he's quiet and he's kind of, I don't know, he's kind of an Eeyore type. He doesn't do a hell. He's just not a boisterous guy like a Sickles or a Hancock. But he was a steady Eddie, and when you realize he was offered and declined the AOP big chair on many of occasions, according to U.S. Grant in his memoirs. So he was somebody who was highly thought about, and he gets killed. Horatio Wright is going to take over. Not that it is Horatio Wright, but he's got guys like David A. Russell with him, and so it's a lot of inexperience, and you've got a impetuous type of a hothead running that 2nd Brigade, Emory Upton, 5th Maine, 121st New York, guys like that. And he's going to kind of help push that envelope. But when you look at the Emory attack, which was the precursor for the whole thing that Barlow did, if that had been coordinated better and not have been piecemeal, because that might have been the battle right there.
Yeah, I think that's what, there was some, and I'm trying to think who it was. I think in Makowski's book, he basically says that, what you said about, had the cavalry not been pulled from Sheridan, it probably would have ended them.
Well, they would have. So what you have is, Stuart's falling back ridgeline. Just think Buford at Gettysburg. If you know Gettysburg, he's fallen back. He's fighting. He's falling back to the ridges, right? He's going from Hare's Ridge. He's falling back to cemeteries. Just think Gettysburg. That's what he's doing. Except it's in Spotsylvania. He gets to the final ridge line, which is where the battle's going to take place, and they're going to end up setting up infantry through Richard Anderson and a guy, Richard Ewell. All of them, they're going to set up at the Mule Shoe. The Mule Shoe, if you've been there, it's a high ground. It's a medium ground, and behind the Mule Shoe is a high ground in a place called the McCool House. And the natural ridge line is a natural defense. So they're going to build breastworks on this defense line. The problem is it creates a salient. Yeah. It's a natural salient. So when Ewell is up there with Allegheny Johnson, he sets up his guys, and they're at a point. And that's, if you look at it, that's what it's more like a Mule Shoe. So it's kind of like
it's like a bubble, kind of, that, that's what it's
right.
It's like a bubble that comes out and needs to be attacked on 3 sides, right?
Well, it creates the classic salience 90 degrees, which creates 270 degrees of attack radius and a very limited ability to fire out or basically keep your men together. And if you burst through it, you're in trouble. But that's what he creates based on it. In Ewell, it says, I can defend this, but I need guns, right? Yeah. So he's going to get that artillery we talked about, and this is going to be R.M. Page's artillery, guys like Thomas Carter's battalion. Yeah. So you got some good artillery, 24 pieces. It's defend this mule shoe. And if the Union had the cavalry and they scouted that, what they sort of did, but they were kind of blind.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that Emory attack would have played itself out.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not sure. Like it just, I mean, and his attack is brilliant. I mean, Emory is like, he's described as having no sense of humor. But he's quite brilliant. Like he's 24 years old. His story though is sad. He ends up committing suicide. Was it 1881 or something?
He's from Batavia, New York. He's out in the Buffalo area, so of course he's miserable because Bills.
Buffalo.
But so he's out there and he ends up with a bunch of bad headaches over his life. And some people think it was a brain tumor. But he ends up shooting himself in the head in a hotel room. And he's buried in the same cemetery with Harriet Tubman.
We've seen his grave.
Seward, William Seward, Frederick Seward. They're all in the same area. But he's a guy who was a rising star. He's a colonel. Yeah. And so he's in charge of the 2nd Brigade, commanding 4 regiments in this. And he knows, if I can break this mule shoe and I can make my ass back, I'm going to get a star. And he does. Yeah.
And that's what McMahon tells him, right?
Martin McMahon he's a staff adjutant with Horatio with Wright, and they're basically telling him, listen, here's the deal. If you can pull this thing off, because Horatio Wright is going to handpick these 12 regiments.
4,500 men.
And this is like an all-star team he picks. But the thing that separates Upton is because his tactics are different. He wants to attack them a fist right through. He doesn't want to spread them out in linear formation. He wants to go right at them. The problem is once he gets burst through, he has no answer for how he's going to hold it.
You have to have the reserves. It's kind of like what happened. Now, he did this one other time at the Second Battle of Fredericksburg, which happened during Chancellorsville. He did it then and it worked. It was on a smaller scale. But it reminds me too of it's not the same thing, but when Meade at Fredericksburg, when he burst through Jackson's lines, and he didn't have reinforcements, it always makes me wonder, what if Meade had reinforcements? Would he have broken? They would have possibly, Fredericksburg would have been very different. But that's what it reminded me of.
I mean, when you study these battles and you really get into them, you notice a lot of the patterns. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the Emory Upton assaults, it's easy to think about Ambrose Wright at Gettysburg. Okay, he goes across the field, an echelon attack. You've got the Floridians on his right, you've got Mahone, you got Posey on your left. He's going to burst through, according to Ambrose Wright, his Georgians on that second wave. They're going to burst through, and they're going to make it to the angle. According to him, he's going to get there, but he looks around and he sees no support. Lane's Floridians have been driven back by Maine and Massachusetts guys, right? At 19th Maine, Massachusetts, those guys, and Posey and Mahone don't even step off really. They kind of, but then Lee says, well, I got across there with one brigade. I'm going to send the whole shoot match the next day at that spot. Yeah. And that's what happens here is Upton goes through with 4,500 guys and he gets through, he breaks through. And you're going to have, he's going against George Doles's Georgians, and he's going to rout them. He's going to get 1,000 prisoners, but he can't hold it. He can't hold it. Ewell's going to call support up, and they're going to drive them back. Yeah. But then it gets Grant thinking, just like Lee at Gettysburg, I got through there with 4,500. I'm going to send 19,000 now.
Yeah.
And I'm going to break that up. And so history, it's funny how these battles repeat itself.
Yeah.
The Union has more success than Lee had to pick his charge in Italy. Yeah. But it's the same concept if you really look at it.
Now, you said this was in a way, Spotsylvania for the Union is kind of like Franklin in the level of destruction that happens.
Spotsylvania has 22 consecutive hours of sustained fighting. The second that Barlow's initial guys hit those 48th Virginia picket line, the shooting does not stop for 22 straight hours. It is the longest sustained fighting in the Civil War. It's probably the longest sustained fighting in the Western Hemisphere, if you think about it.
Yeah,
I've never really researched that.
I think it would be. But you had, and two, the other thing I found fascinating is you have the Atlanta campaign happening at this time as well. And it's equally as just the fighting is terrible. And Sherman's kind of doing the same kind of thing. He's throwing the guys in, but Thomas says to him after Kennesaw, he's like, we have any more like this, we're not gonna have an army by the time we get to Atlanta. He's got to tell Sherman to basically slow his roll. The other thing I thought of too, speaking of Western theater, is I often, and I think I said this to you the other day, because this is what we talk about, what if Barlow hadn't been wounded at Gettysburg? He would have gone out to the Western theater with the 11th Corps.
He probably would have been, yeah.
That's an interesting take, like, how would Barlow have done out there?
Barlow was a winner. He was just a winner. He was. I
think he and Howard got along pretty well too.
No, the thing about Barlow was he was very focused on discipline, on order, on
cracking the guy's legs with his sword.
Right. But this is not a slight on the other guys, but he was an all business guy. And he was wounded in virtually every battle he ever stepped on. Yeah. He was a bad luck Brian of the Civil War on the Union side. he just whatever but you know what though? He fought, but he was the Energizer Bunny. He kept coming, and that's who he was. And he's Francis Barlow.
Pictured Barlow with the Energizer Bunny's body.
Well, he was though. But the thing about Barlow is, when you're looking at the big picture of this stuff, and the average mainstream historian, Barlow is on that level where he falls between the cracks. And for whatever reason, he's not mentioned at that top level with the other guys. And I
think it's because of what happens to him at Gettysburg. Again, it's kind of like Howard, that it's all anybody ever talks about. And it's there's so much more.
But what I'm saying is he should be, though.
Yeah,
he should be.
Absolutely.
And if you read and you study his night march from May. Now, the thing about Barlow was great about him, is his cup of F's was empty with a lot of this.
That's so true.
And when you read, and he didn't have any issues with Hancock at this, as it was the overall leadership. And he had that personal responsibility to lead his 19,000 man corps, those men, into battle. And he's like, if I'm going to lead them in a battle, can you give me at least a little bit of friggin' their game plan? Their battle plan at Spotsylvania was based on a compass from the Brown farm to a White House behind the lines that may or may not exist. And we don't know the ground, we don't know the terrain, but we're going to send you across. And Barlow's like, well, I guess this is it then. I guess we're screwed because there's no way this is going to work. But he does it though. And, they get through and they're benefited by the weather. They're benefited by the fact that a lot of the guns on the Confederate side of that second wave are wet. They can't shoot. And they're also benefited. The big benefit is the fact that Lee, and people don't piss on Lee enough for Spotsylvania, because they really should. At least the first half, taking those 20 guns away and sending them off because he thinks Grant is retreating, and leaving you with 4 pieces instead of 24. Yeah. Those 24 guns that destroyed Gershom Moss are now 20 out of the 24 are gone. So when Barlow hits, he's got 4 guns to deal with instead of 24.
And I mean, I can't imagine. Allegheny Johnson must have been pissed they were taken away. You mentioned something I did not know, that Barlow probably wouldn't have made it to the Western Theater because he was being considered for the Freedmen's Bureau at the time.
That's the thing, is we get the politics of it. It's the politics of it. Barlow was a fighter, and he's I know your boy Howard here, your main guy. Barlow gets a lot of unfair shit from day one at Gettysburg, and it's on a smaller scale than Chancellorsville Howard. But I mean, when he moves up to Blotcher's Knoll, that's a solid position. Now, it's not a good position when you know that Early's coming up behind you and Gordon's come behind you. But he gets a lot of shit for that and a lot of misperceptions from that. Yeah. I mean, the Freedmen's Bureau thing is certainly a possibility. I just think that who he was at the time, I personally think he goes west, but who knows? That's what's fun about this. You can debate.
I know
you never know.
You can. It's interesting. It helps you learn more about them. And speaking of debates, this is like completely getting away from Spotsylvania, but I mentioned this to you as well as MJ, and I think I told AQ about it as well. But I was reading through the Howard biography I had.
No.
Yeah, Anyway,
That's like
Carpenter,
that's like your penthouse letters, by the way.
it
I'm
is.
gonna go read my Howard memoir. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna leave you alone for a while.
I read it for the
Anyway.
articles. Anyway, so I was wanting to just read about his journey to the Western Theater, see what Carpenter had to say about it. And Carpenter talks about how there's that like Congress named Howard as one of the victors of Gettysburg.
Oh,
And
you're going here, huh?
you
You're gonna get
know
MJ
who
going
didn't
now.
like, you know who didn't like that
Mhm.
was Hancock.
The same guy who got mad that me got all the credit in Philly and he had to go to Norristown to Gettysburg. That guy? I know. But
It's a bit too early for OO shots. If you know, and so because MJ and I have discussed the myth of Hancock and Howard fighting at East Cemetery Hill. And I think my opinion, not fact, is that it began it was not created by Hancock or Howard. It was created by the people that were kind of championing them. Because after Howard got named as one of the victors of Gettysburg, along with Hooker and Meade, there was a few newspapers that were pro Hancock, and they wrote about like, how dare, Hancock not get named, blah, blah, blah. And I think it was kind of media driven. But Howard got a letter from Hancock, and Hancock was basically saying like, yeah, what are you having people champion for you? And Howard's like, no. And Howard wrote his wife saying, I'm not doing this to like seek political office or anything. Like, I didn't ask for any of this. But what the conclusion I came to was that this was something started purely out of politics. Like, let's make these guys have a rivalry.
Yeah.
And it was media driven. Shocker. But there was rumors flying around that Howard was like championing for like political office and all this other stuff. And he was like basically doing shit behind the scenes to get people to name him as one of the victors. And that, and Howard was like, no, like, this is not what I'm trying to do. And I think it bothered him that Hancock was so bothered by it. But I mean, Hancock's cool. I really like him. He's a baller, but he was very butthurt over Howard being named as one of the victors.
No, and the thing about it though is it's easy to look at Spotsylvania, and if you really have an agenda, you could sit there and say, because Barlow spent a lot of time complaining that this was something Hancock made a mistake about, and that's not fair, because it's not Hancock's fault that Sheridan was gone.
Yeah.
And no, he did try to get scouts to reconnoiter the area, but they just didn't get out there. The plan that Hancock was, we talk about the compass and all that, that's based on the knowledge, the best that he could do. So this is not and some people take Spotsylvania as a slight on Hancock, and it's really not. But that's the problem with this, is that the longer you stare at anything, you can come up with any idea you want. But in real time, that situation is one that is really unfair. Hancock is he's right at the Landreau house. He moves from the Brown farm right where those 24-pound mortars are being fired. Hancock is there watching, which is probably 150 yards, 200 yards from the front line.
Yep.
So this dude, and he's coming back from his injury at Gettysburg. This is not prime hot. We're talking Willie Mays on the Mets stuff here.
Yeah,
we're getting later, and so he's still doing well. But it's you see the people who really get into Spotsylvania sometimes take this as an opportunity to take a shot at Howard. I mean, at Hancock, and that's what they probably do too. But that's not really fair. It's not really fair.
No, it's not, because there's so much happening. Actually, Scott had a question. He asked, what was Lee's plan with the 20 guns? Was he afraid of losing them, or did he have another use for them?
All right, so the way this what we just said a little while ago, maybe we did, but for the most part, whenever the Union fought and they won and lost, they backed off. They moved. And so Lee had this habit of just knowing, okay, when we fight, no matter who we're fighting, after the battle, they back off. So what happens is when they start moving on the night of the 11th, he's going to move those 19,000 guys, from Todd's Tavern, this is Hancock's guys, all the way over to the Brown farm, and he moves Ambrose Burnside back. Lee thinks that he's retreating again. He's going back to Fredericksburg. So he's thinking, well, this is my opportunity to go chase him on the way. So maybe an opportunity here.
What is the name? Martin Sheen's voice in my head, and that's the thing. Like I'm reading this book about Spotsylvania, and there's all these Lee quotes, and it's Martin Sheen in my head.
Oh, it is. So if you're Lee, you're sitting there and you're at the McCool farm, and you're realizing, okay, I'm getting troops of the Union moving. They're retreating again. They're going back to Fredericksburg. I need to move my guns from the Mule Shoe, which is the furthest point away, around to go get him. Because I'm going to need the guns on an offensive counterattack now. The problem with Lee is he takes those 20 guns. He thinks Grant's retreating, but he's not. He's forming. So the guns go all the way back to Spotsylvania. You have 4 guns left because he's going to go do a counter. And so when they hit, those guns are still far away.
Yeah.
So it was a great strategic point by Grant, but that's why he pulled the guns, because he was going to use them on an offensive and hit Grant on the way to Fredericksburg per what he thought. And that's really was the great mistake that Lee made. Strategically, Grant pantsed Robert E. Lee at this battle. Absolutely pantsed him. To the point that once Barlow's guys burst through, there's these stories where these Confederates are running past Lee. Lee doesn't know what the hell's going on. And he goes, "Get back to your regiment." And they go, and they keep going.
It's kind of like what happens with, Rosie at Chickamauga. All of a sudden there's this instead it's a sea of gray now. Frank has some book enabling here. He said that one of his favorite Civil War fiction books is called Hell or Richmond by Ralph Peters. It's about the Overland campaign, and one of the point of view.
I think I had that one actually.
Frank, I think there's a book about Gettysburg in that series too, right? And I think Meade or Reynolds is one of the characters.
Ralph Peters got some good books, by the way. He's a very underrated. I got a handful of them here in these bookcases, but
I mean, my favorite will always be Smoke at Dawn. That one is, I've listened to that audiobook 6 times because the narration makes or breaks audiobooks. The narrator for the Smoke at Dawn is amazing because he gives all the characters different voices. Like Bragg, he makes Bragg so annoying with his voice.
Yeah.
And then he has Claiborne has this, it's funny, he has a bit of a Irish brogue, but sometimes it disappears. But then the parts where Claiborne is there's one part where he is losing his mind on Polk's nephew. What's his face?
Lucius.
Yeah, and the Irish brogue just comes right out. And apparently that was how Claiborne was when he got angry, the brogue really came out. And HQ said Bernie gets to the Second Corps HQ at Brown Farm. Winnie is sleeping on the couch, Barlow's sleeping on the floor, and Gibbon is chilling in front of the fire. What a sleepover that must have been. I just pictured them all in feety pajamas.
Well, they're having a feety pajama party there. But when you look at that meeting, and they put the battle plan on the wall. They have this guy writes up and he puts it on the wall, and then they're talking about it. And they're like, and there's that great line where Barlow sarcastically says to Hancock, "Are you sure there's a 1,000-foot ravine that we need to know about as we go?" And he rolls his eyes out. And so he gave
no.
No, but he didn't though. And when you talk, if you want to read some good soldier letters, read the letters that took place on the march from Todd's Tavern on the 11th at night. These poor bastards, they're sleeping. It's pouring rain. I mean, it's end of the world type rain. And they get woken up at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night to march 3 miles in the mud with no guide. And some of the letters are great because these are battle-tested officers. And you've got a lot of people in Barlow's command, guys like John Rutter Brooke, for example. And they're just bitching, including Barlow himself. He's bitching about this is so stupid. He has that quote about where we're going or why we're going, and no one's told me. This is paraphrasing, but that's kind of what it was. But they're great letters. They're talking about marching through camps, and when they got to the Brown Farm, they stepped on people's heads and other parts of the anatomy, and the swears yelled back at them. I mean, it's and even Barlow, he says it was true comedy. This march, but again, it's because there's no cavalry. There's no one to lead them. They have no guides. You got people doing guides who've never been there before. It's like going to a Gettysburg tour and having some guy who's never been there telling you what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Who
would
knows?
be. Yeah,
Are there Georgians here?
oh my God.
I know. But that's the thing though, is when you look at the absolute disaster of this whole thing, and then on the Confederate side, while the 11th's going on,
Mm.
you've got Allegheny Johnson, who's a great study in himself, by the way. Allegheny Johnson,
Yeah.
he gets shot in the foot through the ankle at the Battle of McDowell in the Stonewall Valley campaign. And he goes back to back to Richmond, and he's a player. This guy is getting a swerve on with the local ladies. And he had this issue where he couldn't stop blinking. It was a nervous tick he had where you would just blink. And there's that great story. He's at a party. He's talking to some guy's wife, and he starts blinking, and the husband thinks he's hitting on the wife, and it turns out it's a big joke. God. And he had that stick. He had this big hickory stick. And the stories, if you read Culp's Hill, if you read Harry Fawn's book on Culp's Hill, he talks about the men seeing Allegheny Johnson leaning against this tree with this big stick, like that guy from the Lord of the Rings movie everywhere, walking with this big stick. And the men called him Old Clubby because he had this big club. And then at Spotsylvania, he's on the breastworks, and Barlow's guys are hitting. And he's standing up there, swinging the stick at people, just like an old man trying to send back soup at the deli in New York, And he's just swinging and swinging before he gets captured. But he's pissed off those guns are gone. Mm-hmm. And so when he goes to bed at night, he's going to sleep in his full uniform because he just including his boots on. And when the whole thing goes bad and they all get hit, it just ends up a complete disaster. And we're not talking about some B team guys. We're talking about the Stonewall Brigade guys. Jimmy Dynamite Walker. He's up there. The Louisiana Tigers are there, but Hayes got shot down when they were building the breastworks the day before, so he was gone. So a guy named Monahan's running the Louisiana Tigers now. George Stewart, Maryland Stewart, he's up there with his 1st, 3rd North Carolina and those 3 Virginia brigades, 3 Virginia regiments, and they're all going to get routed. Yeah, and some of the capture stories are great too.
Oh, they are. Yeah. Just want to say that Frank mentions that he liked Cain at Gettysburg more than Killer Angels.
Well, Cain at Gettysburg is a novel.
I would agree with that. I've read some of it.
But like Cain at Gettysburg, what I liked about Cain at Gettysburg was he went into detail about the soldier burials. Like he talked about a burial beyond Willoughby Run. Back when those North Carolinians, King Burgoyne's guys got routed by the 24th Michigan and the Iron Brigade. Talk about burying the dead, and it's very vivid. But he's that book is really, really good. If you haven't read it, it's a historical novel about.
I need to read it, and and Frank just said he wants to listen to the Shar audiobooks. They're on Audible and they're really good. Like the whole. Like the one that starts in Vicksburg is on there. I've listened to it though. On Shiloh is really, really good. But the Smoke at Dawn was really what got me into audiobooks. Was I downloaded? I'm like, all right, I'll give this a try. And I just, like I said, I've listened to it like 6 times. I love the story. The Smoke at Dawn to me is Jeff Shar's best work. It's just so like the characters, the contrast between Bragg and Claiborne is so good, and it really shows what is happening with Army of Tennessee. And then Grant is hilarious. His inner monologue is so funny, and Rawlins is like this mother hen, and like there was points I was listening to, I laugh out loud because like Grant will start, he snaps at Rawlins at one point, and Julia's in the room and she's like, Ulysses, don't talk to him that way. It's so funny. Frank also mentions that Allegheny, the man with 1,000 marriage proposals captured at Spotsylvania and Nashville, died single.
Well, Allegheny Johnson was, he's up there with William Hardy, guys like Dan Butterfield. No, he's one of those guys, I'm surprised he had time to put his pants on back in the day. He just did. He could have Porky Pigged it everywhere, and he probably wouldn't have been noticed. But he was a guy who certainly took advantage of that. But again, he was somebody who was very underrated when you look at the big picture with this stuff. But he's got a history with he's got a history with Winfield Scott Hancock, and these guys
Yeah,
would
that's it.
back
MJ.
and so back at West Point, they were like the pranksters. They pulled jokes on people. You know, I'm not sure what the hell they were doing, but they had a good, fun relationship back when they were younger. So when he catches Johnson and he brings it back to the line, there's that story where Allegheny's got his hands in his head, in his hands, tears rolling down his face, and he tells Hancock, "This is worse than death." And Hancock is gonna tell him, "Well, you're a soldier, and this is so is war." But then the George
That's what they said to
Stewart,
Reynolds, right?
George Maryland Stewart. Well,
Yeah.
he did, but Maryland Stewart, when he gets caught, he's different because he's pissed. And he had a history with Hancock back then too. And that great story there where Stewart's is going to be sitting in the back and he's pissed off, and Hancock comes up to him and he goes to shake his hands, and Stewart says, under these circumstances, I cannot shake your hand. And then Hancock says, well, under normal circumstances, I would not offer it, because they didn't really get along. And then when they go to get pulled back, he lets Allegheny ride on the ambulance, and he makes George Lamb. I keep saying Lamb for the other one. For Lamb Willard, for George Maryland Stewart. Yeah. He makes him walk with the other 4,000 prisoners. And the other great capture story is the one about that soldier Hickory hat we talked about.
God, that's so not Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. Reminds me of the mountain when he was fighting that one guy.
Well, he's up there and he's fighting. He's part of Stewart's brigade. He's part of the 23rd Virginia. He's this guy. He's like 6'6", 6'7", this big monster of a guy with this big hickory hat. Yeah. And he's up there with the rifle, and some Union guy goes to fight him hand-to-hand combat right at the mule shoe. And they're kind of pushing back on their rifles, and they're getting nowhere. Hickory Hat, what the hell his name really was, but that's what he's known as, tells him, hey, how about instead of this, how about we wrestle? The guy's like, all right. They put the rifles down, and they get into a wrestling match. And then the Southerner from the 23rd pushes the guy down, puts his thumbs in his eyes. Oh. The Union guys literally yells, I submit. And they both get up and they stop and they have a good time with it. But so they just we don't want to kill anybody. We just want to wrestle, have some fun. Yep. And that's what they do. Yep. But these are the cool stories, though, when you study these battles, when you really dig deep at the ground roots battle of these soldier stories that you find. Yeah. That these nameless people who don't nameless and faceless, we always say, paraphrase Lisa, but these soldier stories that don't show up when you read battle
or when you read the memoirs, you don't have that kind of point of view, and it's a different point of view than, say, reading Sherman's memoirs or Howard's memoirs or Grant's. Scott mentions, did anyone read Peters' series under the name Owen Perry? I think I've read one of those books. I had no idea Owen Perry was Ralph Peters.
Oh, he's he changes. That was a pen name of his. That's a pretty cool idea to do that. And that's there's been a lot of this.
No, but there's a lot of
going back to old Historicus there with old Uncle Dan.
Yep.
Right?
Uncle Dan. Frank said, I like to imagine their comrades all stopped to watch them wrestle. Hope there was a referee.
Well, I was thinking if there was an RKO situation, maybe someone came up the top rope and all I could picture was MJ and you at the old Cemetery Hill,
Oh yeah, I'm gonna get an RKO'd at Cemetery Hill. I mean, getting back to that thing I found out about Howard and Hancock, though, that was really interesting. That was one of those things. Now I want to go find those newspaper articles and read what was written, because they basically just slam Howard all over the place, and it really bothered him. Yeah. The other thing too I read that was really funny was that, and Carpenter's bio came out in the 50s or 60s, so that's the last time when we've had a bio about Oliver Otis Howard, and it's very balanced. Like it's a lot like Simmons' book on Claiborne, where you just get to know the person, the good, the bad, the ugly about them. He said right. Howard's one problem was the fact, he did sometimes take himself pretty seriously, and he didn't like to be wrong. But that's anybody, right? But I guess when he went out to the Western Theater, there was one night where, was it Sherman and Jeff C. Davis were sitting around the campfire. Howard comes along and they deliberately start swearing to see how long it takes Howard to get up and leave. They were just letting it fly, and Howard was like, F this, and he left. And then Sherman was like, okay, it's all well and good to be like that with your, men, but Jesus, dude, let loose once in
I
a while.
can I can picture OO with his rock hard abs and his handsome face with his Bible walking out. Good day to you, sir. Good day to you, sir.
What? Yeah, he would have had a Maine accent, right? Apparently, he had a high-pitched voice.
You probably did. Sure.
I can't imagine what like. I'm trying to imagine what Howard's voice would have been. Maybe he had a role in the movie Gettysburg. I would hear it, but
well, he probably always had a pant in his breath from running so often. He probably had a tough time catching his breath. He probably talked like that kid from Malcolm in the Middle show who could never catch his breath. That's probably how he probably talked to him.
Have a great weekend, MJ.
MJ, just had
but yeah, it's but just the Carpenter biography, if you can find it, it's so worth reading. It's called The Sword and the Olive Branch. I think that's what it's called, and it's really like it's very balanced. But the Civil War, like I'm planning on writing a book about Howard someday once I'm done grad school. The Civil War only takes up like 90 pages. The rest of it is his time in the Freedmen's Bureau, but then again, you got to think about it. The Civil War is only like 4 or 5 years of his life, right?
It's like the Gordon memoir. If you read the Gordon book, for the most part, he only talks about the Civil War in the first half of the book. The rest of it is all politics, that's how.
But yeah, I was just randomly, and I found, and the stories are funny about Howard. Like, of course, he's the guy to get up and leave the campfire because somebody is swearing too much. But then Sherman wrote him this really nice letter saying, like, I know what happened at Chancellorsville, but, believe me when I say I trust your abilities, and I think you're a great soldier. And it also, Carpenter does a really good job explaining why Howard was chosen for the role of Army of the Tennessee after McPherson died, which, by the way, McPherson's death is, that's like kind of Sedgwick's as well. Oh, good morning, Bjorn. Our sponsors
hey,
here.
Bjorn, what's going on?
He said, I know a place where you can get Carpenter's Sword and Olive Branch. Bjorn, my copy is currently from the library and I have to return it, so I might be reaching out to you about that.
Yeah, I bet you, Doug. He has the Holy Grail, and he has the Ark of the Covenant to that place in Chicago.
That Meade autograph, he had that. He showed us when you were there. I was there virtually. That was so cool.
I'm pretty sure, and I'm not kidding. I'm pretty sure I've dreamt about that bookstore after the fact I visited. If you're in Chicago, go check out Bjorn's bookstore at the Lincoln Bookshop, and it's not what you think it is. We're not talking about a Borders book here. It's talking about a museum.
Yeah. To follow them on, find their page on Facebook, like it, follow it, whatever you need to do with that, because they do a lot of great live streams with new Civil War books and Abraham Lincoln books, and they interview the authors, and they're really good. Like they do a lot of good stuff. But yeah, I think I know where I'm going to be buying that copy of my own copy of Sword and Olive Branch now.
Yeah, that's certainly a good place for it.
That'll be my present to myself for completing my first year of grad school.
Oh God, I'm just glad that year's over.
But anyway, it's a very good book. And I think we were talking with Dr. Carmichael about how there hasn't been a recent bio about Howard. Even he remarked
there hasn't been. I mean, honestly, Howard is somebody who's deserving of. We said before, hopefully you write that book, and that'll be cool.
Oh, I plan to.
But I mean, I think there's a lot, not that against the Lincolns or the Grants or the Shermans or the Lees, but been there, done that. If you're going to write a book, the hard thing is the primary sources. Like I've talked before, I want to write a book on Charles Tilden, 16th Maine from Castine, right? And there's just not a lot out there because these people, they fought, they went home, they lived their lives, and that was it. And I don't know how
it's like George Henry Thomas, but his papers, we don't have them. Same with Sheridan. Sheridan's papers were lost in the Chicago fire. Bjorn said, you guys are great. Oh, thank you. He said, Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago since 1938. You guys have been around that long.
No, but we've talked about this many, many times, but I was there last July 4th weekend. I was out there for the Cubs Red Sox weekend. Yeah. And so I went to go meet Bjorn, and I honestly, I just assumed it was a bookstore. And I went in there.
It is like a treasure trove.
And you got to be buzzed in and stuff. And you go in there and you're like, whoa. And it was like that. I mean, I couldn't imagine working there, Bjorn, because I would just sit there and stare all day at the stuff. I get nothing done. but it's a really cool place. Reach out to Bjorn and you can go visit a place. It's not too far away from downtown. I think it took a 10-minute
And
Uber ride to get out there
also,
from the.
if you need Civil War books, like support a local bookstore, like, you know, kind of the independent bookstores like Abraham Lincoln and Bookshop. Because that's where I got my 11th Corps books from, and those ones I gotta read those again too.
And they're a good sponsor of ours, because all the books that we give out for the book clubs are all from Bjorn. So thank him for that. So if you've won, Leonard probably has 1,000 books at this point, but
Leonard's building his library.
if you've won all the books he gives us, we give away, and the ones that he sent to us, if you've won, thank Bjorn, because that's where they came from. So we really appreciate
they're
them,
really great books. They're really cool. Frank said congrats on the first year of grad school. Been there, know what it's like. Yeah, thank you. It was pretty intense the last month. So I'm
really I didn't notice.
Halfway
it's amazing how I was able to find a way to get by on that one. How that happy place.
But yeah, definitely check out Sword and Olive Branch for Howard for a different biography to read. And I was kind of skeptical going into it because it's like 1960s, but he writes a lot like Simmons, like the Claiborne book, just balance.
No, there's a lot of, we're blessed to know a lot of good people who write, and we talk about Lisa Samuel all the time. In my opinion, she's the best Civil War poet in the world. We've said it a million times. People are
Eric Scheinlein's book, the Black Iron Mercy. That book made me cry.
And Eric is a great writer, and he's a fireman from Milwaukee who writes Civil War books, and he's a great dude. But even the Ken Master and Browns, the fantastic
Tim
Dr.
Smith,
Terry
Western
Alford.
Theater, Tim Smith.
Western Theater, Tim Smith's awesome. We had Dr. Alford on, we had Ken Master and Brown on. We've had obviously Pete Carmichael on. These are people who, they do what they do for the love of the game.
Yeah.
Right. And it really shows in their effort, in their work. So that's what's one of the best things about this podcast for me, since we started this a few years ago now, is the cool people we've met along the way. Right. And so there's so many good things. There's so many good books and good people. And to a man, they're all great people. They're people you have a beer with and you hang out with, and that's what's cool about it. But definitely, but check out, read as much as you can, because there's a lot of cool stuff out there.
Yeah, there's and like I said, I've read, I think it's called Season of Slaughter, about it's an emerging Civil War book by Chris Makowski and I think it's Chris White. Excellent book, and you can take it with you to the battlefield. I've started Jeffrey Wirtz. It's something Heart of Hell, and it's about the Bloody Angle, and it's really good too. And then I've got to read MJ, our friend MJ was awesome and sent me a book about Howard and the Freedmen's Bureau.
Yeah, it had a centerfold in it. Oh, that was weird.
His stepfather, which I'm going to read that too. Now, thanks to Frank, I'm going to be checking out Ralph Peters' books.
We have Ralph Peters' books here. There's a few of them here. Yeah. But Kate Gettysburg is a good one. That one's really, really good. I think, you know what though, as I sit here, Frank, I think you're right. I think it's better than Killer Angels. I think it is. Because
I enjoy Black Iron Mercy. I enjoyed it more than Killer Angels. It's a different type of book, but Black Iron Mercy, anybody who's not read that,
Black Iron Mercy, in my opinion, is maybe one of the best books, or if not the best book written about the Iron Brigade. I mean, those damn Black Hats is a pretty good book. But Eric's book is a novel, and it talks about soldier stories, and it's pretty accurate. But there's a lot of good stuff though,
Yeah. Oh, Scott said you guys are amazing. I really love your passion and your ability to tell a great story. Thank you. Yeah, that's what we love. Like, we love telling the stories and finding out just kind of different things that gets away from just, these guys just aren't dots on a map. And also too, it's like to tell both sides of it as well is very important. Like, I mean, Howard is admittedly my favorite general to study, but you know what? I love Claiborne too. And I think a lot of it goes back to the fact that, like, Claiborne was not from the US, just like me. And he found his home. He found, he joins Freemasonry. He finds his home, and he is, I mean, in my opinion, and I think you agree with this too, he is the greatest general that the South had.
He's certainly the best. He really, really is.
Yeah, he just kept getting better. He's a lot like John Brown Gordon in the sense they kept getting better. And I read an article about Claiborne recently, and it said what you and I have said, that Claiborne constantly learned from his like if he made a mistake, he's like, okay, how can I make myself better?
I'll tell you who else learned. Speaking, you got me thinking now. Who else learned was Grant.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about
Spotsylvania has given me more of Grant is not my favorite, but I respect him so much for Spotsylvania.
The thing about U.S. Grant, what made him really special. We've had our questions and our disagreements with the Grant stuff with Rosecrans and Hooker. I mean, no one's perfect to me except Tom Brady, but for the most part, what made him separate, what separated Grant from a lot of them was his ability to adjust. And we talk about this battle with Emory Upton. Okay, this is a guy from upstate New York who West Point guy, 23, 24 years old, who comes to Grant and says, I have an idea. This strategy hasn't really been tried much, couple times. This is what I want to do. And Grant says, you know what? It's just crazy enough to work. Let's go with it. He's not someone who's stuck in his ways like a Lee or a Meade.
Yeah, Grant is a great listener too. And that's one thing that makes him funny. In my management course that I took for my MLS, I took it in my first semester. My instructor, Lisa, we talked a lot about Grant. She used him as an example of a good manager. And like, she knew her stuff about him. And I was like, so I remember raising my hand. She's like, when you think of a good leader, and I rose my hand, she's like, I know who you're going to say. And she wrote Grant on the board. And I'm like, yep, mind reader. But she said like his ability to listen to his subordinates and give them the space to talk was very important in his leadership and his generalship. And like no one else in the class studied the Civil War. I was the only one. So I really I remember giving examples of, I gave the example, and this is something that happens in the Overland campaign. And it's something that I really look at. It's basically what Grant is a manager, if you want to get down to it. So there's a point in the Overland campaign where he's on his horse Cincinnati, and he's got a choice. To turn one way is to retreat. To go the other way is to go towards Richmond. And the men have just had this horrific battle, like their morale is getting low and all this other stuff. Grant takes Cincinnati and he starts riding towards Richmond, and the morale in the army turned around immediately. And that is what a good leader does, a good manager does, is they lead by example. If you want your guys to do something, do it yourself, because then they're more likely to follow you. And that is one of the and that was the example that Lisa used in her class when I took management with her, was that. And I was like, I told her after, I said, that is the class, that's the thing I tell everybody about Grant is this, you want to get your people to do something, do it yourself.
Well, that's a true leader. One of the best definitions of leadership is when the people who are following think they did it themselves. That is true leadership. Yeah. And, and we look, specifically trying to get back to Spotsylvania with this, is you talk about soldier stories. And we talked a lot about not about a lot, but James Walker. The 2nd, 4th, the 5th, the 27th, 33rd Virginia, which is what? Stonewall Brigade. Yeah. And the history that he had with that is, if James Walker is somebody who people don't really study. Virginian, he went to West Point. He was kind of a hooligan. Not West Point. He went to VMI. He was kind of a hooligan. He ends up being a student of Stonewall, of Thomas Jackson at this time. Yeah. And Thomas Jackson doesn't like James Walker, the students. He's a professor. He wants him kicked out of school. He wants him gone. He wants him to get the hell out of here. So they go to expel Walker. Walker gets pissed off. You know what he does? He challenges his professor Jackson to a duel. Imagine that. Imagine pissed off at Simmons pitch. So Jackson doesn't accept it because he's not of equal rank. He's not going to do it. But he does kick Walker out of school. So 1861, Walker is going to sign up as a private in the Confederate Army. He's going to be in Stonewall Jackson's. He's going to end up in his brigade. Mary Jackson doesn't like the idea. He goes, "This guy wants to kill you. You really want to put him in your army?" And he goes, "We'll deal with it." But they become close, and somehow that commander private relationship, to the point that Stonewall is going to promote Walker to be the commander of his famous Stonewall Brigade.
Yeah.
And he's going to fight at Spotsylvania. He's going to be injured here, and then John H.F. Funk will take over.
Yeah.
But they're going to end up that relationship right till the end. But then when he gets killed in 1863, they're going to have a close relationship from a guy who wanted to kill him as his students. And just imagine what the hell he did to deserve that. But those are the stories that when you study these that you learn about that are really neat, you know?
Yeah. That's the thing is fascinating too, is the friendships that you spring up that you wouldn't think would, because they're opposites.
Right.
Getting back to Grant, one of the best descriptions, and I mean, maybe I'm biased on this, but was Howard's of the no, just getting back to oh God.
My eyes.
Anyway, no, Howard talks about when he gets out to the Western Theater and they're waiting for Sherman, and he talked about how Grant and Sherman couldn't be more opposites. He said Sherman was always talking, always fidgeting, kind of think someone that's got like, I guess ADD or whatever, right? Like always moving. And he said Grant often just sat there. And the one thing he noted about Grant,
as opposed to A.P. Hill always plowing.
Yeah, so bad. Grant would sit there and listen. And he said he listened he would just nod, and then he would pause, take it all in,
right,
and repeat it back so he understood it. But that was one thing Howard said, is he gave people the voice, to listen to their ideas. And that's clearly what he did with Upton.
Speaking of A.P. Hill, I don't want to shock you here or anything, but did you know A.P. was sick at the Battle of Spotsylvania? Shocker.
He's that employee that is like, you got a big project going on at work, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm sick today.
He was the guy he was the employee who looked at his sick days and took advantage.
Yeah.
This guy needed some vitamins, but I digress. But go ahead.
I do respect him for his spite march.
There's always that, but he's a fascinating guy. But it is pretty something to talk about this though. But this is one of those battles. There's a lot of battles like this, but this is one where you really can. There's a lot of cool stories. We'll talk about this next week. But if you ever go to the Smithsonian and you go to the American History Museum, there's a stump there. Okay, yeah. There's so it's so funny. So there was a tree right in the mule shoe, and because of mini balls, not artillery, mini balls, it got knocked down.
Yeah,
and there was a stump there for a while, and there was a guy named Nelson Miles. He was in charge of the 1st Brigade under Barlow, guys from Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, and what happens is he goes back and he goes back and he notices the stump is gone.
Yeah.
So he's like, what the hell? So he ends up at a bar in Spotsylvania. This is after the war, obviously. He goes back, it's probably 1881, somewhere around there, 80. He goes back to a bar and goes, there was this stump full of bullet holes that was on the mule shoe. Someone dug it up and it's gone now. And the guy goes, I know where it is. He goes, it's in the back of this guy's barn. I'll take you to it. Like he stole it. So they go back there. Miles finds it. He commandeers it on behalf of the U.S. Army, and they send it to what do you call it? The Smithsonian, where it's still there. But it's neat though. If you go to the Spotsylvania battlefield, there's a marker where the tree was. It's a big concrete slab. And there used to be a marker on this tree, but apparently the marker must have got up and walked away, but the marker's gone now. But it's just a concrete block, and if you go there, it's right in the mule shoe. You can see this block with no marker. That's where the tree was, and it was thousands of bullets. And there's a ton of bullets still in there. But if you go to the Smithsonian, it's right near where Winchester is, right? Yeah, the horse.
Winchester's so cool.
But that's the story with that. But he found out that someone stole it and stuck it in their garage and was going to steal it. And then Nelson Miles found it and sent it over to the Smithsonian. But you go there today and it's in a glass case and you can see it. It's probably filled with mini balls, but it's pretty cool.
That is, I saw that when I was at the Smithsonian about 6 years ago. And I also, speaking of Rienzi, Winchester, Sheridan's horse, that was cool to see. I mean, that's who I'm fucking Civil War nerd. I named my car Rienzi. my first car I ever bought. My little Toyota Corolla is called Rienzi. And I did that.
It performed good service for us yesterday, Mary.
It did.
First mass. That was pretty cool.
Yep. But seeing Rienzi in real life, that horse is he's gigantic. Like,
well, there's a lot of hands on these horses. You can go see little Sorrel, who's smaller, but
yeah, because Sorrel was a Morgan. Again, Civil War nerddom, go down a rabbit hole. We did an episode on Civil War horses, and the thing with Little Sorrel was like a Morgan horse, and they were originally bred in Connecticut, and they were smaller. They had like stocky, but they're not the handsome horses. Like, they're not like the big, stallions and mares that look pretty and all that. But the
ones that look like Sarah Jessica Parker. I'm sorry, never mind. Was that out loud? I'm sorry.
Yep. Anyway, Morgans are very calm and collected in battle. It's just part of their I guess their breed or whatever. But that's who Jackson, Little Sorrel, and poor Little Sorrel. Like, after the war, I think it was she outlived Jackson by, I don't know, quite a while. But she would go to like reunions and have like, I think people would pluck her mane and stuff. But I guess like Jackson's widow took her, and she figured out how to open up, the horse figured out how to open up like the gate, and she would go out walking with the other barnyard animals and let them all out and stuff. And she lived to be really old too. Rienzi, I'm not sure what happened to him, but the interesting story about Rienzi is that he was given to a private from Port Huron, Michigan, which is like 90 minutes from my hometown. And Port Huron, Michigan is the place where Sheridan's saddle is, which is like, I'm like, how did this end up here, not the Smithsonian? But anyway, I guess Rienzi was an asshole of a horse. And for some reason, when they got out to Mississippi, or not Mississippi, but I think it was like Missouri or something, wherever they were organizing, one day Sheridan came up to what became Rienzi, and Rienzi liked him. They got along, and the guy was like, you can have him, he's a prick, kind of thing.
Who else had a horse named Rienzi?
John Wilkes Booth.
John Wilkes Booth. Yeah, had a horse named Rienzi too.
Yeah, that's very cool. But yeah, the Rienzi in the Smithsonian is really something. Apparently Sheridan did need a step stool to get up on him because he was so tall.
What's it like to be short? But seriously though, but there's a lot of cool stories with this. And when I've been at Spotsylvania a handful of times, and there's only been one other time I've been where there's been people there. Do you remember last year we went down?
There was nobody there.
Was the McCool farm?
Except that one guy.
The one dude. But the thing that's amazing about Spotsylvania is you're talking about Omaha Beach in the Civil War. You really are. And people talk about the cornfield in Antietam. They talk about Hell's Half Acre. They talk about the Hornets Nest at Shiloh. Yeah. But there's not a lot of places in the world that have more violent history than the Bloody Angle and the Mule Shoe in Spotsylvania. And when you go there today, for one, it is amazing how peaceful and pristine it is. And of all the battlefields I've been to, there's been a handful. You could look out and you could almost see the exact thing the soldiers would have seen. The woodlots are in the same place. There's not a lot of monuments clogging it up. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and it's not far. If you go to Gettysburg, it's a 2-hour ride away. There's not a lot of places to go. Not too far. That Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania wilderness area, with of course a stop at the 1781 brewery along the way.
Yes, that place is amazing.
But you go to Elwood, you go check out where Stonewall Jackson's arm is buried. There's probably like a 5-mile radius of so much Civil War nerdgasm that you can go to. It
was Civil Wargasm that Horwitz used in his book. Jim just said, holding up my fucker sign for the short remark, Mary and I are the same height.
Well, you know what's something, Jim, you and me and Mary are gonna hang out. I'm gonna feel like one of the Celtics that day. It's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna feel like Jason Tatum that day. I feel like I always wanted to be tall, and when I hang with you guys, I'm gonna be tall. So we need to make that happen pretty soon. So we absolutely
Jim is
have to make
awesome,
that
but
happen.
Jim is awesome. He's been like with us from the beginning of this, and I've known him for quite a few years. But it's so funny, our roundtables, we'll start talking about books, and Jim's like, I've got that one right here. He just like reaches for it.
No, Jim is awesome. He has that fantastic that newsletter he does on Twitter. If you follow Twitter, if you're still on Twitter and dropped off of Twitter yet, do that. But you know what though? What's you can learn more from the people who I don't. And when you say self-educated, it's a compliment, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to sit there in a class to get a degree to learn this stuff because it's all there. But you have to want it though. You have to want it.
You can study it, like, and I mean, everybody on here knows so much about it. We have great conversations, and that's the thing. It's like, it's just talking about the Civil War, and that's what's good. Frank said, I thought the Omaha beach of the Civil War was Fredericksburg, and he said, to him, Spotsylvania is like Franklin of the East.
It's bigger than Franklin, though. It is.
I mean, but his comparison
to Fredericksburg is actually pretty good. There's a lot of things like that. But the thing that separates Spotsylvania is the fact these guys fought for the most part in the drizzle, in the rain, in the mud, in the fog, and the fact that you have 22 consecutive sustained hours of fighting.
Yeah.
And the thing about it though is this isn't results. Now, after Barlow breaks through and Lee finds out what's going on, there's a lot of stuff that happens. But at the end of the day, it ends up basically being a draw.
Yeah.
Which is being down 28-3 at halftime and coming back and tying. I mean, so you have to give Lee credit. And the thing about it though is there's so many. When this whole thing goes down, Lee's sitting there at the McCool house and he's told what's going on. He's told by an aide, we're getting astroglided here. We're getting pounded. So we're done. And Lee has to figure, he's thinking, okay, in one moment, he's thinking, Grant's retreating. I'm going to go beat him and this is going to be the end. But then he has an existential moment now where he says, shit, this could be over right now. I'm done. The Army of Northern Virginia is going to be destroyed. The Civil War in Virginia and the East is done. The Civil War and all that could be over today, like that. And he ends up rebounding because he uses John Brown Gordon, those Alabamans, he uses them and those Georgians. And there's that fantastic story where here's Grant. I mean, here's Lee. He's sitting on his horse. He rides up to the front. And Gordon's like, you need to get the hell out of here because we can't lose you. And he's like, I need to be up here. And he needs to be, he's going to basically be told by all the men, get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
And if you read Gordon's memoirs, it's a really cool story where they're up there. They're at the McCool house, and there's Gordon and his horse. He looks at one of the other officers, who I'm blanking on the name right now, admittedly, and he's leading forward in his horse, hiding from the bullets. And there's Gordon standing straight up with his hat. Fuck this.
That's Gordon.
And so the general goes, and so Gordon rides up to him and goes, why are you hiding behind your horse? Right? At that very moment, a bullet flies and clips the back of Gordon's jacket, zips by. And he looks at the officer and goes, if I was leaning down like you, I would have hit the side, I'd be dead. So stand like me. YOLO, go for it. And he stands up again, like riding the 7 seats. Right? That's what he does. But again, but that's what Gordon does. And so he is able to get a second level of defense up that's going to push back at that bloody angle. And that second line of defense that the Confederates are going to use. John Hoffman, Robert Thompson. These are the guys, these Georgians, Virginians, and they're going to help drive. Now you have Birney. Now you have Mott's coming again. You've got the rest of Barlow, and you got Burnside coming. He's coming from the other side. And they're able to mount to fill that gap and push them back and create that quagmire, giggity, right at the battle line, at the bloody angle. And now it's able to hold them off till Grant says, the hell with this. He finally does back off towards the North Anna River. And the battle, the Overland campaign continues to phase 3 now. But we'll talk about that next week. But that second part of what happened, you went from being down 10 runs on the ninth to tying it. And Gordon does a real good job here. And so you can say what you will about John Brown Gordon, but what he did at Spotsylvania, chef's kiss. If you're a Confederate.
Absolutely. He's one of the best the Confederates had too. He's up there with Claiborne. Some book enabling from Bjorn over at Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. He said Jeffrey Wirt's Heart of Hell is a fine account of the Muleshoe. I'd also recommend Gordon Ray's History of the Whole Spotsylvania Battlefield, and William If It Takes All Summer is still very good. So that's awesome. Again, and the thing about the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop too is they have older books as well that might not, I want to say, not necessarily in print, but ones that might be tougher to find, I think, as well.
The stuff, honestly, the stuff he has, I said before, I'll say it again, it's like going into a museum. And Bjorn is obviously he's
such a good guy. So
well, nice. Because the thing about Bjorn is he knows his shit. I mean, he does tours at Shiloh.
I think he was a ranger at Shiloh. Am I getting that right? But yeah, Shiloh's like, if you want to know about Shiloh, talk to Bjorn because he knows it.
But there's pictures, there's books, and we spent a while in there. And but it's a great visit. It's such a cool place. But you get there and you go, I don't think I'm in the right place. The Uber driver screwed me, Mary. I'm stuck in a warehouse area. But then I walk in there and someone says, "Is there a bookstore around here?" And this girl goes, "Yeah, go over here." So I knock on the door, and then here comes Bjorn, and he buzzes me in. I was like, "Oh my god!" It was pretty cool. It really was.
Yeah, he had that Mead signature. That's probably going to be the basis for my tattoo when I get it when I'm done grad school.
Oh no, definitely. He's got a Shizanovsky tattoo, Vladimir Shizanovsky tattoo right across. It's like 9,000 letters.
Alec just popped on, and I see his pictures. Rosecrans. He's like, which generals do you think are underrated or forgotten about?
Oh God, here we go.
Okay, well, yeah, obviously Howard, but I think Rosecrans.
Rosecrans is a guy who does not get enough credit because the politics held him down. That was a big part. If you're talking Union, Rosecrans is certainly up there. McPherson is certainly up there. But there's a whole bunch. On the Confederate side, I think obviously Claiborne, John Brown Gordon, there's people like that, but there's a whole bunch of them though. I mean,
I would say Kimball, who
Nathan
Kimball, Pants's Stonewall Emily.
Nathan Kimball's a good one. He certainly was. But I think when you're reading the Civil War stuff, there's that top level, right? There's the Grants, the Lees, the Shermans, but every one of these guys who is kind of underrated, underfaced. There's a lot of people. We mentioned Francis Barlow. He's one. John Gibbon. He had the fall with Hancock, but he's
and he had to take leave that today. The leave that Gibbon took was not for like a physical injury. That leave today would have been for mental health. He had
these people, when you look at it, and I'll tell you what, it's one person who probably doesn't get enough credit is probably John Sedgwick. We've talked about, because he was a guy that, unfortunately his death kind of turned to a punchline, but he was somebody who was a top level general in the American Civil War, no question about it. And the other guy we talk a lot about who doesn't get enough credit is Lew Wallace, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, Wallace. Just quickly, for Confederates, Richard Taylor thinks that Richard Taylor was underappreciated. That's what Bjorn said.
Yeah, well, he certainly was. He certainly does it.
And Bjorn said, "Oh, you guys are swell, thank you." And he said, "Yeah, got to wear the gray and green for a couple summers during grad school."
No, that's awesome. That's pretty.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of guys.
Definitely. Lew Wallace definitely, and Lew Wallace we did every so often we're going to post a picture of a general that doesn't look like how we think they do. So we did that with Lew Wallace when he was younger, no beard. And our friend Emily won a book for that.
Yeah, we did. Emily. Yeah, we did that from time to time. That was a fun one. She's really cool. I love that. I love the fact that people they'll go to cemeteries or battlefields and tag the podcast on stuff and see what.
Oh yeah, that's fun to see people doing that. Frank mentions that our friends over at Battle Gettysburg podcast just did an episode on Sedgwick.
Jim and Eric do a good job over there with that.
Yeah, they do.
And in Sedgwick, even Slocum. If you're talking Gettysburg, there's a whole bunch. A lot of these guys,
Blackjack Logan. is another one. Sorry.
Yeah, Blackjack's up there, I guess. He is. Slocum is the only Confederate, the only Union general, I guess, besides Sickles, who doesn't have a monument at Gettysburg. You know, he did every other.
Slocum's got one. You said Slocum.
Not Slocum.
Sedgwick.
Sykes. I was thinking Fifth Corps. Right. So Sykes doesn't. He's the only one. I was trying to think. And so he's another one who's underrated for the most part. But again,
I think Slocum is too. Slocum's really.
So Slocum does. He had a good set of hair, by the way. That Pete Carmichael hair. He's pretty solid, you know. But he does. But there's a lot of underrated guys. And
there is. Yeah, there's ones that just don't get studied. And two, it's not necessarily the generals, but it's also like the Charles Tildens, the David Irelands, as well. That just these kind of Emory Upton is another one that don't get studied enough. You know, I'm looking at shockingly, I have my Sherman staff mug. So I had my beer in this morning, and yeah, there's Howard, there's Blackjack, Jefferson C. Davis, Slocum is on there. David Bell Burney is another one.
David Bell Burney, he's one. He has his moments, certainly Gettysburg, but you know, so speaking to July 2nd here real quick, I'm going to Gettysburg. I guess we have to talk about that. David Bell Burney was certainly one. But he had a lot of people, guys like, Philippe Brigitte de Trobriand, John Hobart, Henry Ward. They had a lot of guys who helped a lot of different things. Sykes is somebody, I mentioned him a second ago. He's someone who doesn't get a lot of credit, primarily because there's a lot of conjecture about who did what. There's that story with Strong Vincent about sending the troops up to Little Round Top, where Sykes said, I told him to do it. It's in his battle report, so that may diffuse that myth. But there's a lot of people. I guess my point is, you can find almost any one of these people at that level and find that they were probably underrated, because there's a have and have-nots on the Civil War as far as generals go. Yeah, and there's a lot of unnamed people. You mentioned Gershom Mott, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. He's going to take over what's left of Sickles' corps, the Third Corps. His division is going to be Sickles' guys.
Yeah.
And so these poor bastards, they end up getting raked by the guns over there at the Muleshoe.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people you can make a case with. And
I think on the Confederate side too, his name does get mentioned a lot, but I think PGT Beauregard, or Beauregard as we call him on here, I think he's underrated. I think he would have been the perfect person to lead Army of Tennessee, but he's not friends with Davis, and Bragg doesn't like him. And Bragg, for some reason, becomes Davis's military advisor, which, okay. But like, I think Beauregard is underrated. I think William Hardee is underrated.
Hardee is definitely overrated.
Underrated.
Underrated.
Yeah.
He would have been somebody who would have been a nice fit in Army of Tennessee after Johnston.
But he didn't want it. He didn't want it.
He would have been a nice fit. I think there was a lot of different combinations that Davis could have picked. I think that Hood was the wrong one.
Yeah, he also just could have kept Johnston.
And that's my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Hardee or Beauregard would have been great, because Beauregard was. I need to read more about him, but my thoughts on him are that he was a guy that kind of thought things through, what he was going to do. I mean, the retreat to Corinth was not that bad, but everybody thinks it is. Beauregard and Rosecrans were the heroes in the early war, and then were forgotten about. That's how he feels, and I think from Germany, so that's pretty cool.
Oh, there you go. So William Rosecrans, obviously, he has his history with Crew. We've talked about that a million times. Yeah. The thing about Beauregard, and he has Shiloh won. 2 days of rain is going to slow his army. That's going to allow Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio to come into Pittsburgh Landing. And but he sends that victory lap letter. He sends that 28-3 letter, right? Yeah. He sends that. And then he gets beat. He falls back to Corinth, Mississippi, and he defends that line. He has those Quaker log lines set up. He retreats his army in the face of the enemy, which is the hardest thing to do, and he gets out of there. But Davis never lets him forgive that, because at that moment, he went from winning Shiloh to losing completely, and he chains his ass to a desk for the rest of the war.
Which is sad, because he and Hardee had so much. I think they were very talented. And like, you got to think about it. Hardee and Beauregard are the ones, again, Beauregard's what we call them. Beauregard are sitting in Savannah as Sherman's getting there. And Hardee has just found out about Franklin. And I've told this story a million times on here, but they were the ones that had to make that decision to basically get the F out of Savannah. And that was probably, I think it was tough for them, but then at the same time, it was like, we can't, I'm sure they got together and Hardee was like, did you hear what happened with Hood in Tennessee? And Beauregard was probably like, yep. And Hardee was probably like, no more, we have to get out of here.
No, but again, you're dealing with the fact that Albert Sidney Johnston gets killed, and it turns into that never-ending struggle to replace him.
Army of Tennessee is it is probably my favorite Confederate army to study because
it was flawed. It was flawed from the beginning, though, because they've got that army initially has to defend a 400-mile line, which nobody's going to defend that. And I'm sorry, no one's going to do that.
And they were also putting people in charge that should not have been in charge, and the ones under them were the ones that should have been in charge. But it was all about who you knew and who you were friends with.
But enough about Braxton Bragg. But that's how
the Jacobs bat signal.
But again, we've said before, and you and I have been to a lot of the battlefields in Georgia and Tennessee. I don't see anything that Joseph E. Johnson did wrong. I don't.
He was good.
But he was vanilla. He wasn't aggressive. He knew Sherman. He knew how to beat Sherman, and he did a good job delaying. But he was giving ground, and he was falling back to Atlanta. He did lose Atlanta. He did, but
he didn't lose Atlanta. Hood did.
Well, right, but I mean, but they were on the doorstep. Patton wasn't going to hold Atlanta at that point. He fell back, obviously, through Kennesaw.
But I heard Patton was overrated.
He went across the Chattahoochee River, Mary, back in Atlanta. Right, but he did fall back. Atlanta was lost at that point. After they pushed back past Kennesaw, New Hope Church, all that the whole thing was over. But it doesn't forgive the fact that Davis did put Hood in, and he changed the strategy and tried to push back.
So bad. It's so bad. As like David, who comes on here and he comes onto a roundtable, he always says the hashtag never Hood. I completely agree with that. I mean, Hood is this guy who is great division, pretty good corps commander as well, but he's the guy you put him in charge and he's the Tasmanian devil. The Tasmanian devil cannot manage a place.
No, like we said this 4 million times. They put him in up by 20 points in a football game, and instead of running the clock out, he went 5 wides and tried to attack and got his ass handed to him.
And he also was not. I don't think he was fully recovered from his injury at Chickamauga, which was pretty horrific. And I mean, I don't think he was addicted to Laundrum at the time, but the effects of that, we know now the effects of opioids can last for quite a while. But I think his injury did plague him. And also, when you're putting men like S.D. Lee in charge, a man who says, I want a victory, and he didn't.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you right now, the battle, speaking about, of course, the Battle of Tupelo, my Patriots lost to the Eagles a couple of years ago in the Super Bowl. I'm going to tell people if they won that. I'm just going to. And that's what S.D. Lee did. And but the media bought into it and said, "Hey, woohoo, hurrah, huzzah!" And that's how it went. But
he's got such a punchable. S.D. Lee has such a punchable face.
Oh, there's a lot of punchable faces in the Civil War. Pemberton's. I mean, there's a lot of guys. Pleasanton's and other ones. But there's a lot of people like that though, and it's. But we have a little bit of fun with old Hood on here, but he did have his moments. He was somebody who I think he had a ceiling and he went above his skis. Once he left the corps level, went to the Army commander level, I think his key, his ceiling was the corps.
Yeah, he needed someone to manage and direct him. He needed that guidance. I mean, I would never want to manage an entire company because I would not be good at it. I need somebody above directing me. David said the Confederacy's worst enemy was Jeff Davis. Absolutely. And Alex said that I think he's referring to Hood here. Hood's put into a difficult position. He still outflanked Sherman late in the campaign, but he wasn't great.
But he was, let's not say he was put into a position like Reynolds was. He was begging for this position.
Oh, he was like right behind
He-
the scenes, like, I think you need to put me in charge.
He was that guy going behind, going behind the word of the boss, bashing people to get the job is what
Yeah.
he was.
And meanwhile,
So-
he's telling Johnston to do certain things, but then he'll write Davis,
Yeah.
can you believe Johnston did this?
And Davis wanted to be a general himself. He wanted to be on the field commanding troops. That was part of. They were all playing Cowboys and Indians at one point. They all were.
Yeah,
They just
David
were. They
said
just
that the
were.
ceiling for Hood was division commander.
Well, I mean, no, I mean, it probably was. He
Yeah.
had his high point probably at Gettysburg, but anything about, I think core, but anything above that, certainly, that was it. That was his saturation point. No, there's no question.
Yeah.
And what we said before, he doesn't get hurt and wounded at Gettysburg. That who knows how that changes.
Yeah, he might not have gone. Well, I guess Longstreet still would have been sent out west, but like Longstreet also is going out west. There's a guy that is like trying to commandeer an army. He's like, I'm going to go out west and I'm going to take over for Bragg.
Look at Gettysburg. I mean, he gets hurt, he gets wounded, and Evander Law is going to take over from those Alabamans. They're going to take over. He doesn't even know he's in charge. He's sitting at Big Round Top. He's hanging out, just chilling. And he finds out that he's in charge. He doesn't want to leave. I mean, there's so many miscommunications that went down. One of the most underrated aspects of that battle was Hood being injured, being wounded so early, right?
Yeah. David made a great comment. Hood was swinging from Davis's back 24/7, asking for the job.
Oh, he was. He
so
definitely
true.
He wanted the job, and look, everybody wants to be promoted. Everybody wants to,
But he was being like really like, you need to give me this job. Oh, Lisa, thank you.
I'd like to be the shortstop of the Red Sox too, but I know I can't do the damn job. Doesn't mean but God knows I'd like to do it.
Yeah.
But that's the reality is everybody has their limits. Everybody does. But the reality is, he pushed through it, and a lot of them did. And I like I said before, I don't blame Hood for Franklin because I get that. I blame him for Nashville. When Schofield gets back to Nashville, when the whole point was to prevent him from getting to George Thomas, and then he attacks him anyway in the snow.
He's like, let's go.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there was a method to the madness.
Yeah, I do blame him for Franklin. Franklin's terrible.
Well, but you know what though? But I get Franklin. Spring Hill, Breckenridge, Claiborne, that's not their greatest moment. I get that. Cheatham. Yes, Cheatham. I mean, they get through that, but you still have an opportunity to get Schofield to Franklin. And so you go balls in. You go all in.
Yeah.
And then you get beat again. And then Schofield crosses the river and gets back to Nashville, and you hit him there anyway?
With your broken army? Where you've lost 6 commanders?
The whole point was to keep Schofield out of Nashville, and he's in Nashville. That sounds all like the horses are out of the barn at this point.
Like I always say about John Bell Hood, I always say like he sacrificed himself on what he thought was the altar of the Confederacy, and he expected everybody to do the same thing. There's a reason why nobody was very happy when he came into command. And I mean, and I am coming around to the idea that Claiborne, yes, the Irish thing was against him. I think the emancipation was more so against him too, but I think Claiborne leading that army would have been, I don't know what he would have done, because Sherman was scared of Claiborne. Doesn't talk about it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. But we're talking about a guy that beat Sherman.
Sherman had Forrest, Nathan Bedford Forrest, and he had Claiborne in his head. There's no question.
Oh,
and that's not a slight on Sherman people. That's not a slight on Sherman.
They don't like that. They're like, Sherman didn't talk about it in his memoirs. You're not going to sit there and write that Irish guy is in my head and I'm terrified of him.
I mean, everybody's got their white whale, right? Everybody does, and clearly Claiborne, but especially Forrest, were in Sherman's head. And I wonder how much Joseph Johnston was too.
Joseph Johnston, I think definitely was. And that's why Sherman and him became really great friends after the war, is I think Sherman had a lot of respect for Johnston because he realized he was up against somebody good. That's why when Hood came into play and, Sherman goes to ask McPherson and Howard, who were classmates with Hood, and they were basically like, Howard basically told Sherman Hood was an idiot and said, no, you're not going to have a problem. He's going to fight and you're not going to have a problem against him at all. And Sherman at that point breathed a sigh of relief because it's like, oh, okay, good. Frank said he's reading for Cause and Country right now. and he understands why Hood attacks, but he doesn't agree. But he attacked because it felt like the last opportunity.
Right, but right. If he's not stupid, he's going to attack.
Yeah.
But the ironic thing about it is, say he beats Thomas and beats Schofield, he takes over Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's going to be able to get that Nashville hot chicken, right? He's going to be able to take
He's
Broadway.
After the Nashville hot chicken.
You know, he's going to be able to get Tootsie's, go sit up there and listen to the good music there. But what's he going to do? Sherman's already going through Georgia. He's living off the land.
Yep.
He's basically conquering an island that no one's going to hit again. So there's so many, and again, and this is not the thing about it though. It's not really to say that isn't really a hit on him, because in his mind that was a big Union base. It was the first state capital in the Confederacy that fell. There's a lot of psychological reasons, but if he gets there, he doesn't know this at the time, but it's not going to make a difference. But at the time, he thought it was. So I can see why he would do it.
Yeah.
But at that point, as Kenny Rogers once said, Mary, you got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's over. You back away, and then his Army of Tennessee people, for their troubles, they get shipped to Johnson again, go fight in Bentonville.
Yeah, Johnson comes back. He's like, "Well, here I am again. Like, I'm back." Alec just said he read a biography about Sherman, and the peace talks with Johnson were respectful. They were really respectful. Which biography did you read? I've read a couple. My favorite is Fierce Patriot by Robert L. O'Connell. That is one of the best biographies I've ever read. It was so good about Sherman. Really told his story well. Oh, In Service to My Country by James Lee McDonough. Yeah, I've read that one too. It's good. We have that book, actually.
But there's no lack of books on Sherman. There isn't. I mean, there certainly isn't. But
yeah, CD mentions whoever led the Army of Tennessee would be hamstrung by Davis and Bragg.
Well, that's the thing.
They had to be drinking that Kool-Aid.
But don't forget too, Hood is like, Jay was like, I'm gonna give you this job, but if you're not aggressive, I'm gonna take you out of it.
Oh, so Hood's like, hold my beer.
So he had to. So he probably takes a shot of Landrum and says, "Let's go," right? But no, seriously. But that was his marching orders. He knew he had to. If someone tells you, Mayor, your job, you have to do this. You don't do it. Well, you know that he's going through Army commanders of the Army of the Tennessee like underwear, just rolling through them, that you had to do it. That's your marching orders. But again, you have to make a determination like Grant does or like Lee does.
Yeah.
When this is over, Lee Appomattox, he knows it's over. We're done. Sorry to James Longstreet. Sorry to E.P. Alexander, but we're done. He has to use that sixth sense to know when the shit's done.
Yeah.
And that was the thing Gordon doesn't know. He's a rock'em sock'em robot.
What do you mean, Hood?
Hood, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Hood just I don't know. It's Army of Tennessee is a great story, but it's a sad story too. With them at the end, as the men are having to kind of put away their battle flags, and that's a huge thing when you have to put away your colors, right? Like that. And Bentonville is this pillow fight. Unfortunately, the pillow fight results in Hardy's son getting killed. He's only, I don't know, 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
That's so sad. Like,
well, I mean, any death, I mean, you look at this, I mean, obviously the Sultana.
Anything after Atlanta.
The Sultana is the worst thing of all as far as soldier deaths. I mean, if you want to look at just overall, OSHA violations, talk about that.
Yeah. But Frank says from an outside perspective, Hood Leroy Jenkins, the Army of Tennessee.
Well, we said many times he does, but that was his mindset. There are people who are offensive like Lee, like Hood. There are people like defensive who like Longstreet, who that's the whole thing. Is you find a good solid place of defense to defend, and you let someone fight to you. You got it. Yeah. That was why A.P. Hill felt that Spotsylvania was a great position. But the problem, what A.P. Hill didn't realize, probably because of the itch, he probably realized that 120,000 men against 65 is a bad day for Mother. It's a bad combination.
I mean, the only person that could fight outnumbered and do it well was Claiborne, like at Wrinkled Gap, right?
He would have need to Luke Skywalker that shit to win that battle.
I know.
And honestly, but again, A.P. Hill. But these guys don't realize, this is what's the important thing about it with this, is they don't realize the Union military strategy changed on May 7th of 1864. And of course, Lee's not going to know it. and
No.
he's Grant and Lincoln. Lincoln says, they told him your goal is not Richmond, it's Lee.
Mhm.
And Grant is like, we're going to hit Lee and we're not going to stop. It's like a great hockey fight. Chris Nyland against John Cordick in the 80s, just going until one falls. Lee knows he has the man advantage, and through a mathematical equation, through a formula, he's just going to win. That's why Cold Harbor happens. That's why this battle happens. That's why Petersburg happens. All the way through these battles. So he knows, I'm going to lose a lot of lives. I'm going to be called a butcher, but at the end of the day, it's going to save lives and end this war.
Exactly.
And so, but the Confederates don't see it that way. They still think they're trying to get Richmond. So that's why the goals change. Is it's still capture the flag for Lee. It really, really is. Whereas Grant wants Lee.
Yeah.
And that's why, to be honest, that's why the Appomattox terms are so mind-numbingly progressive. Because for a guy who had Robert E. Lee in his crosshairs and wanted him bad, to give him the terms he got, I know it was a lot of Lincoln, but the terms he got after just tunnel visioning on Robert E. Lee for a year plus, to finally get him and shake his hand and say, go home. That's what's amazing about the Civil War. What makes it so unique about American history was that there's no mass hangings. He didn't line him up and shoot him. Go take your men, go back to your farms and live your lives.
That's what Lincoln wanted, right?
But that's what's great about the Civil War. That's what makes it so unique in world history. Was he did that because that Grant went to bed every night dreaming of catching Robert E. Lee. And when he finally caught him, he gave him the best terms he could.
Yep.
And unfortunately, because Lincoln got assassinated, that Reconstruction wasn't able to deal with that fruition. And you had Andrew Johnson with his military governorships and all the shit that happened.
Yeah.
But when you look at the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen.
No. Jim mentions he's reading the North Star Canada and the Plots Against Lincoln, which is written by
we gotta get that book. That's
actually I'm gonna my uncle owns a bookstore in our hometown, which we're going to be going back to Canada in a few weeks. I'm going to see if he's got that book because I want to pick it up when we're there, because Julian Scheer is an amazing author. He's so good. He writes a lot like Alex Rose. It's just a very you get drawn into the story. But yeah, I definitely want to read. We definitely have to read that book because I know Edward Doherty's mentioned in it, and you found it at Keys.
Yeah, Keys. He's another one.
Part of my hometown.
Part of the 16th New York, the Lincoln's Avengers chasing down Joe Wilkes Booth at Garrett Farm. But look at this, almost noontime there. It is time.
It is. It's time to jump off. This has been a great conversation today. So thanks everybody for coming and hang. We do this silly thing every weekend, and people come and hang out and talk.
The sad part about this is we'll shut this off. We'll go grab some beers. We'll sit in our deck and we'll just keep talking about this all day.
Yeah, that's all we do. It's Civil War, sports. That's about
if we videotaped half of our friggin' life, my God. And we even mentioned going to Clara Barton's grave yesterday. We went to
Clara Barton's grave and house yesterday.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. So she was down in Oxford, Mass. And so her birthplace was the sunrise sunset of Clara Barton. So where she was born and where she's buried. And I've been out there before, but Clara Barton, obviously the angel of the battlefield, as they call her. Her gravesite's an amazing place to go visit. There's so many cool places to go visit. But that's part of the deal. So why don't we jump off and we'll go take this conversation up privately on the deck and we'll talk about Howard probably. And we'll go from there. So all right.
I gotta contact Bjorn and see if he's got stored an olive branch. Jim mentions that he got a review copy, so maybe we want to contact the publisher about that.
Yeah. No, maybe we'll have Julian on as a book club next year.
That would be cool. He's a good guy. He does he wrote actually, so just this is off topic, but Jim, if you like Julian Scheer's writing and if you read outside the Civil War, he wrote a book about a murder that happened outside. It's about in a town called Clinton, Ontario. And he wrote a book about this guy called Stephen Truscott, who was going to be the youngest person to be executed in Canada. But he got a stay of execution and he spent time in the Goderich jail, which Darren, you're going to go get to see in a few weeks. You
spent some time there, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I actually worked there for a couple summers.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, I think the book is called Fit to Be Tied or something like that. But anyway, it is such a good book. And I wasn't that interested in it, but then I picked it up one day and I'm like, holy shit, this is really good. Plus it's from like area I lived in. The guy, Stephen Truscott, eventually he finally, like, they took that off his record. He wasn't accused of murdering Lynn Harper, the girl that was found dead in the forest, which we're going to be driving by in a few weeks. But anyway, yeah, it's a really good book too. Gillian Shear is a really good author, really good Canadian author.
No, we'll definitely check that out. So what's coming up for us? We have
Spotsylvania Part 2.
The Search for Curly's Gold.
Yes, we have our roundtable Wednesday night. Wednesday right? At 6:30. We're going to do it 6:30, I think.
I don't know. Whatever you tell me.
Anyway, emails will be sent out. But if you've never attended before, Civil War Breakfast Club at gmail.com. We will send you an invite. We don't have a set topic. We just nerd out about Civil War.
Yeah, we just do a Zoom call. We bring everybody on, everybody just talks and hangs, just like this, if everybody's on. So definitely do that. That'll be next Wednesday, right?
Wednesday.
Okay, 6:30ish. I guess.
Yeah,
okay.
6:30 Eastern.
So we'll do that, and then we'll finish that episode, and then next weekend. What are we doing next weekend? Are we doing live next weekend?
Spotsylvania Part 2 next weekend. Our roundtable will be on
Sunday, right?
Or our YouTube live stream will be Sunday at 10 because we
have shenanigans with the Sammyas next weekend.
We're hanging out with the Sammyas.
Yeah, so we'll have fun with that. So we'll
Jim and I are excited about going to Greater Good Brewing.
Oh, we'll have a good time with that.
And then our next, so episode 108 will be Spotsylvania Part 2. And then episode 109 is going to be Pickett's Mills.
Next week on our live, we are going to talk about an event we're going to be doing in Gettysburg in July.
Yes, we will have an announcement to make about something we're going to be doing in Gettysburg. We just have to iron out the details and we'll be announcing that.
So we're going to be doing an event during the anniversary weekend, but I promise it's going to be awesome. People are going to be invited to come, and it'll be a cool history thing. We're going to do a podcast thing that we're going to do. So go check that out. We'll tell you the details. Watch this spot. We'll give you the details. I promise it's going to be something you're going to want to go to. And it's not just drinking, Mary. This is actual real history thing we're setting up with some friends of ours. Yeah. And we'll probably do some sort of froth up afterwards, probably a force.
Froth up afterwards.
So we have a lot of fun stuff coming. A lot of cool stuff is coming down the pike. So watch this spot. All right. So let's jump off. We will talk to you all soon. Have a great rest of the weekend. We're all thinking Celtics, Mary. Yeah. Right? Against Philadelphia. We got to beat them this weekend. Get on to the conference finals and get ready for hopefully win the Boston championship. It's been like 4 years since we won one, so I'm getting a little tired.
Wow, what's that like? My team last one.
I'm getting tired.
The last time the Indians won was Civil War veterans were alive.
I've had 4 years. This drought has been awful. We need to get another one. Stupid friggin' Bruins, fucking bastards. But anyway, so off we go. So all right, guys, have a great weekend. Enjoy the rest of your time. We will talk to you all soon. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and be good to each other. Yeah. As everybody says. So all right, guys, have a great weekend.